Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk about chapter 27. I'm going to try to be fast about it, but it is a very sort of loaded chapter. Um, we're going to talk about romanticism, realism, photography. We're going to be in Europe. We're going to be in France and Spain. And then we're also going to be in the United States. So we're going to start here. We're going to start here in France, and then we'll go down to Spain, and then we will go to the United States. So what's happening since the last chapter? The last chapter we had all the revolutions happening. Um, and in this chapter, we'll see what's going to happen under Napoleon. Napoleon, unfortunately, will, after helping with the revolution and working towards the cause, will have a coup d'état where he takes over after being first consul, and then eventually he will crown himself emperor. He's thought of as a great military leader, but he's incredibly good at self-promotion, and how he does this is with his art. So his quote is, "The truth is not so important as what people think to be true." That is sort of the definition of political propaganda. So he commissions artists to tell the stories he wants the public to see and remember, cultivating his own image, his brand, if you want to call it that. Everybody does that now, right? So his artists shape and promote his image above all else while editing the historical record as he demanded. And under Napoleon, things change. The landscape changes. He starts to take over many places. And one place he starts to travel to as well is the East. And we're going to see that sort of influence some art styles. Uh, like many other leaders, he decides that using the Greco-Roman traditions will help solidify um, his authority. He'll seem educated, knowledgeable, powerful, calling back to the past. And of course, every time he uses Roman things, it supports the idea that he wants to be emperor, and which he, of course, will be. So he very much likens himself to a Roman emperor. Remember, Rome took over lots of places, and they built their temples everywhere. So here you see this La Madeleine. It seems to be a quotation of the Parthenon, but then again, it's also very frontal. There's a porch. We have these Corinthian columns, fluted columns. We have a frieze. We have the pediment with sculpture, but it seems to be peristyle, which is more like the Parthenon. He called this a temple of glory. So there's La Madeleine, another um, uh, Roman temple in Paris. You can see it's frontal. There's the front stairs and the porch. So it's sort of the combination of both. But the inside of this church is kind of deceiving because it has these giant domes with oculi. Remember the circle that met lits and light. If you took 114, you'll remember that from the Pantheon. It has all these Roman arches. It has the Corinthian columns. So the little pediments there. He's creating a space that recalls both Greco-Roman things and also Romanesque and Byzantine. So he's recalling the ages of the empire, but he's also bringing in images from the church, which he wants to do. And we'll look at another painting soon. He's trying to make it seem as if the church is also supporting his becoming emperor. So this is a painting by Jacques-Louis David, if you remember him from the Oath of the Horatii last chapter. This is still neoclassicism, but under Napoleon, of course, a lot of the same artists are now making a whole different kind of art. Oath of the Horatii was sort of a call to arms. And that's one of the reasons why David had been jailed. And now that he's out of jail, he is working for Napoleon. So he's helping cultivate this image of an emperor after deposing the king. Doesn't make much sense to me, but here we have it. This, obviously it's a very doctored up image of Napoleon, who most likely didn't, lead the charge anywhere. Of course, he's going to be shown like a Roman emperor. If you remember Term 114, if you took it, they were very big on equestrian statues for emperors to look as if they're so, like they were leading the battle. And David makes several of these. They were very successful. Napoleon crossing the Alps paintings. He also does official portraits. And here you have Napoleon looking almost like Louis XIV in his pose here, but like in his military um, uniform. This is David's coronation of Napoleon, and this is by far like the most loaded with political propaganda you can get. He has the Pope seen giving a blessing, even though the Pope really was just passive in the whole thing. Um, he adds his mother in over here later. Um, right here, because she refused to come to this. Um, and the whole thing is like a stage. On one side, we have the priests and imperial court, and the other hand, we see the all of the soldiers. So we have the church and state all here supporting Napoleon, who has his laurel on his head, and he is crowning his wife. So he's taking over. He's going to do it. David had many students, successful students, but he has two that we talk about in this chapter. This is Antoine Jean Gros, and this is a painting of Napoleon visiting the plague-stricken in Jaffa, so it's in East. And he's seen here as, sort of, he's going to touch this plague-stricken man as if he would. And it's more like almost like a holy scene here where it's doubting Thomas. So he looks very benevolent. He looks like a Christ figure coming to save all these people, even though, as you can see, he's not going to save them. They have the plague. And he's not really going to touch them either. So he's, this is just propaganda. He didn't, none of this could have happened, but this is a good example of this, what's going to be called sometimes called orientalizing or exoticism, where artists are going to get a real taste for this, the peoples of foreign lands. They think it's very exotic and want to include it in their paintings. There's a lot of things coming into Europe at this time, imports. There people could have all kinds of, props to put in their paintings. But Gross is quite a technician. He really does study his figures quite a bit, and he goes to great lengths to try to make the figures seem as if they're decomposing or dying. And here's a close-up of, the Napoleon scene. So this is, propaganda, but it's also considered neoclassicism under Napoleon, but it has a lot in common with Romanticism that we'll see in the future. Napoleon's sister insisted on having a sculpture made of herself as a Roman goddess. And she's, in marble. So she's like a Greek sculpture in her, neoclassical shades here. And she married a Roman nobleman, a Borghese, and she moved to Rome and thought of herself as the most desirable woman in Rome. And as a matter of fact, she had a lot of affairs, and her husband locked this sculpture away and kept anybody from seeing it. If he couldn't stop her, he could stop them from at least looking at an image of her. This is another student of David's, probably a more successful student, and this is Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, and you can just call him Ingres, and this is called The Apotheosis of Homer. Ingres had been studying in Rome, and he was fascinated by Raphael, and the Mannerists as well. So he comes back and to France, and he makes this painting sort of as an homage to Raphael. So the Homer, apotheosis is like the climax, the top of the game, kind of. So he's at the top of his game, and here's Homer sitting in the center of sort of the triangle here. We have our Greek temple in the background here, and everything's centered around this. And he's getting his laurels, which is, associated with the arts. And below we have Homer's figures, allegorical figures representing Homer's biggest successes, the Iliad, and she carries a knife, and the Odyssey. So she has an oar. Those have to do with the stories, the poems that he wrote. We have all kinds. Oops, we have all kinds of figures in here that have to do with, um, you know, the um, the Renaissance and Greek and Rome. We have Sappho the poet here. We also have Aang himself, and then we have peeking out. Um, we have Aang himself. So very much in line with the School of Athens. I hope you kind of figured that out already, right? We have one central figure instead of the two, Plato and Aristotle, and we have all kinds of figures around them, the who's who in the ancient world, and then we have the inclusion of, um, at least one Aang person of contemporary times. So this is sort of like the School of Athens for the uh, neoclassical age. So it's interesting that David's students, at least these two, both paint Napoleon as well. So this is, of course, it's a beautiful painting. This is, whoops, I'll go back. Um, this is Aang's style. He's very sort of, he overly blends everything so you don't see any lines or edges. Everything's very kind of crisp and almost photographic, which is before the photograph, but not for long. Um, and that was his style. And we're going to remember that because there's going to be a competitor that comes about soon. So this is his Grand Odalisque. Again, Europeans are fascinated by the East at this time, and you can call it exoticism. Um, and it's not very PC, really. They're using these things in just a mishmash way without any regard for what they really are. Or, especially Ang had never even gone anywhere. He never went to the East. And he went to Rome, of course, but he never went to the East. He didn't know anything about these things. He's just sort of using them and, reading stories about these things and sort of using his imagination. And we can see the influence of the Mannerists here in this woman's proportions. So an odalisque is a woman in a harem, and we'll see another harem soon, which is a lot more authentic because in harems they would be domestic situations. They would not necessarily be, they wouldn't be, places of prostitution. Um, so this woman is unavailable to us. She sort of, turns her back and her arm hides her breast, but she is engaging us, right? So she's not like super passive. Um, and again, this blend thing where there's not a brush stroke to be seen. The distorted proportions influenced by Mannerists, and of course, all the exotic things. This is, not a woman from the East. This is, a Parisian looking woman with Eastern things all over her room. And Aang loved to paint these. You don't need to really see these. He's, fast. He was very successful. This is what, European men thought of and wanted to see. And he taps into this idea and makes a lot of money. He makes a lot of money off of portraits. Oops, this is blurry. Sorry. But let's look at this one. This is, I forget what her name is. I want to say Princess Borghese, but I think that's just on my mind. But you can see his style is this almost photographic style. And we're going to see his competitor with a different style. So Romanticism is the direct opposite of Neoclassicism. Remember, Neoclassicism was last chapter, but it continues under Napoleon. So Neoclassicism is in line with the rational, with Voltaire. We talked about him last time. You remember the scientific revolution and everything should be, rational, based on a scientific approach. Romanticism is more aligned with the writings of the philosopher and writer Rousseau, who believed that man is born free, but everywhere in chains. He called for freedom of thought, worship, action, speech, and taste, and should always be supported by the government. That sounds familiar to this country. And he said that the path to freedom was through the imagination, not feeling, imagination and reason. Sorry, the imagination and feeling, not reason. And this is Fuseli. We're not going to study him. He's not going to be on your next test because this is just so odd. Like there's nothing really to compare this to unless we go to like a Gothic tympanum or something. Um, some artists go in a very much sort of nightmare um, routes to romanticism. Others will temper it with a different attitude. But this is something in between. This is Francisco Goya, who is a romanticist, Spanish painter. And this is his etching, The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters. This is from a series called Los Caprichos. Um, and you can see the title, The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters. So this seems to be a call for Voltaire and the Enlightenment. But his quote really goes on. That's what this says, the sleep of reason produces monsters. But his quote that he says about this is the imagination abandoned by reason produces monsters. United with her, so imagination united with reason, she is the mother of arts and the source of their wonders. So it's sort of Fuseli was just emotion. He's saying we need to sort of combined rational thinking and imagination. Goya was the court painter for the Spanish king and queen, Charles IV. This is a while after Velázquez had been the court painter. There's a few kings in between with other artists. And you can see how the style has changed since Velázquez. This is an unidealized portrait. And Spain is in crisis. We have all these revolutions, and the royal family is scared. I mean, they can see what happened to the Louis up in France, and so they're trying not to look very ostentatious or extreme in their spending. So, it's not an elaborate. They are, of course, well dressed, but it doesn't seem as if, it's not a message like Napoleon is sending. And of course, this is a quotation of Velasquez. Here we see this giant canvas and we see Goya looking out at us. And this painting is also a little historic because this is at the time of Napoleon, and Napoleon will actually convince this guy, Ferdinand, to help overthrow his brother with the promise that he would be installed as king, and Napoleon promptly puts his own brother, Joseph, on the throne. So after the king and queen are, uh, taken over, they're exiled, and Napoleon's brother is. This happens through bloody battles, and Goya starts to paint for the revolution. At this time in Goya's life, he had actually gone deaf, and we'll get back to that. But on May the 2nd, hundreds of Spaniards rebel against the French, and somebody throws something at the troops, and on May the 3rd, the Spanish round up the French round up all the Spanish revolutionaries that are around and march them out of the street, and they execute them one by one. So Goya, who had shown sympathies in the past, is now showing these atrocities against the Spanish. He actually painted both days, and I'll go back to this. This is the 2nd of May, so this is, when all the fighting happens, and then the French have had enough. They, say, we're going to end this once and for all. So he shows this painting, or he shows the French here all lined up. They're faceless. They're like a faceless killing machine. And then, of course, hopefully you recognize this as kind of a Baroque style here. We have the figure in the center in his crucifix pose. in the diagonal lighting, the drama, the moment the guns are about to fire. And it's just this, horrible massacre scene, and it's just terrifying. And you think like, so these guys are dead, this guy's being shot, and then everybody waiting in line to be killed. It's just, horrible. So, of course, this is romanticism. This is sort of, the awful underbelly of nature and human nature, not just, man against nature. It's man against man in this battle. So Goya, actually goes after he's deaf for a while. He goes temporarily blind and paralyzed, and this is all from a mysterious illness. He does gain some of his sight back, and he is able to move around, but he never gets his hearing back. And he buys this house outside of Madrid called the Quinta de Soto, which is the House of the Deaf. And he paints what are called the black paintings. And you can see this reconstruction here. These have all been taken down and they're in museums, but the replica's there if you want to go see the house in Spain. And this is one of the more famous ones. This is the one from your book. This is Saturn devouring one of his children. Um, and this is just this is in line with Fuseli, this nightmarish scene. But Goya's point is that the Greek word for Saturn is chronos, which is a similar word for time. And so this is probably some kind of um, message about the fleetingness of time. He's feeling very much that his time is going to end. All these terrible things are happening to him and to Spain as well. So the violence because of all the things he's seen, but also, the things he's feeling. Another romanticist artist that we look at back in France is Géricault. Géricault was a lot like Da Vinci. He liked to go to the morgue. He liked to go to insane asylums and study the faces of people and paint them. So remember, Da Vinci liked to capture these psychological studies like in The Last Supper. And Da Vinci also went to the morgue and he made all these scientific studies. So Géricault is very much like that. Um, and he's trying to capture sort of like the nature of man, but through the facial expressions um, of the insane. Um, this is his charging chasseur, and this is, makes a good comparison to Napoleon by either Ang or David, where we have this much more painterly style. Everything's sort of flowing and textured, and we do see the brush strokes. So that's very different than what they were doing with neoclassicism. This is Géricault's famous painting, The Raft of the Medusa. This painting, he actually made a life-size raft in his studio and made all different studies. He got all kinds of things from the morgue. He brought pieces of people home to decompose so he could study this. This is a scene about a terrible thing. The Medusa is a ship that ran aground out at sea, and the captain and all of the wealthy people got in all the real lifeboats, and they make this raft, makeshift raft for all the rest of the people, so the lower classes and the soldiers. And this is a real event, and they are left out at sea. Um, and they have to resort to cannibalism, murder. I mean, it's like this horrific thing. There were survivors that were interviewed, and so all of this is known. And this was in the newspapers, and Géricault read all about it, and he became fascinated with the story, and he decided to make a gigantic painting of this in the size appropriate for a history painting. Of course, it is history, it's a contemporary event, but not many artists have painted real events, right? If you want to think of Napoleon crossing the Alps as a history painting, that makes sense, but that is not necessarily a true thing in the vision that David had. It's propaganda. So Géricault shows these people, and they're all in a triangle format like the Renaissance, but you see this sort of dynamic lighting of the Baroque, And then way in the distance, if you can see this thing, there's a little ship there, or it's a ship in the distance. They're waving to it. This is a ship that will not find them. They won't be found for hours later. And this was just a terrible scandal, especially because the captain had been installed by the king, and he really was not qualified to be in charge of anything. And you can also see this giant wave about to hit the ship. So, um, it's really it's this romanticist idea of, given the opportunity, man might not make the right decision. This is Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People. And this was another French Revolution, the Revolution of 1830. And we have the personification of France in her Greek style, or yeah, her Greek sculpture style here, carrying the flag. We have a musket, somebody holding a musket here, which was a newer thing in France at the time. We have a young boy with his guns. We have Notre Dame in the background here. So they're in Paris. And here they are just sort of trampling over the fallen, as if, the fight must go on. We must carry forward. And it's people of all different classes. It's students, workers, children, and it's showing the horrors of war and a call to revolution. This is very similar to, say, in theory, it's close to, say, Oath of the Horatii, but in style, romanticism is very sort of painterly and dynamic. It's much more, um, exciting, I guess, whereas the rational neoclassical art of Oath of the Horatii is very sort of static, like a play. Well, Delacroix does go east, unlike Ang, and this is actually Ang's competitor. The two of them have two different schools, and the salon is split. What style, should the salon sort of copy? What should be sort of like the official taste? Um, so he visits Africa, and he never forgets it. This actually he painted 30 years or 20 years after he went and saw these things. But you can see all this brushwork and contrast. Um, that one, uh, Death of Sardanapalus, we're not going to cover that. That's in your book, but this is just, it's an exotic scene from a poem, Lord Byron. I won't be using it on your test. We have too many images. So this is Delacroix's Woman of Algiers, and this makes a good comparison to what Ang was doing. Remember his Turkish baths. He had never gone. Distorted figures. This is a harem where, it's a domestic setting. It's women that live together in a wife situation here. And this is the difference between the two styles. So we have, I should have flip-flopped these. We have Delacroix, very painterly, romanticism, and then we have Ang, neoclassicism, rigid, static. And in fact, the salon is constantly going back and forth between these two, because Delacroix believes in using color, and Ang like to use line, right? So color versus line. Romanticism lends itself easily to landscape. People seem to want to return to nature during the Industrial Revolution, and I show these pictures because, people are traveling to the cities. Cities are becoming very, very crowded. The factories have, many, many workers, hundreds of workers in them. There's no environmental acts to keep anybody from polluting, the skies. Cities start to become incredibly polluted. People have a longing to return to nature. Um, Darwin is writing his theories at this time, and people seem to be very interested in nature in contrast to the Industrial Revolution. So the landscape is drastically changing, literally, because of all this pollution and the buildings, and people have moved from agrarian societies to city life. And it is really kind of a stressful place, especially with all these plagues and diseases that run rampant in Europe throughout these time periods. So landscape does lend itself to romanticism, if you want to think about romantic, like uh, the sublime or the power or awe inspiringness of nature. So this is an abbey in Oak Forest, and here he's showing a ruined abbey and a graveyard with figures. So we have, the graveyard is obviously a symbol of, these people will be these in this situation soon. We see like the past, all of these people are gone already. So it's like, time. And then, of course, nature, even though it looks like a winter scene, nature will continue. These trees will get their leaves and nature will go on. Man will pass, but nature will still go on. And Friedrich was like a master at creating these atmospheric, textural landscapes that have this sort of mystery to them. This isn't in your book, but it's my favorite, Monk by the Sea. So a tiny little man compared to, all this vastness of nature. This is the one in your book. So he's a German painter, and he's trying to connect back to nature during the Industrial Revolution. And this is, I said this at the beginning of Romanticism, this is not just a visual movement, this is a literary movement as well. Um, and of course, this is a movie, Frankenstein, but Shelley writes her book about Frankenstein. He also goes to the Arctic as well. So we see artists sort of picking up on that kind of idea. John Constable is an English artist who made these very nostalgic agrarian scenes. Remember, soon there'll be, the steam engine, and there will be machinery that will take over for a lot of jobs on the land. People are moving to the cities and doing away with this kind of life. So Constable is remembering this fondly. He's, sort of embracing this natural way of living as if the Industrial Revolution isn't going on at all. And this isn't in your book. This is up in the Yale Museum has all these. He did all these paintings that were just clouds. He considered them studies, but really, I always think of them as like the beginning of abstract expressionism, but as well as with this painter here. But you can see, I'll just go back. Artists are becoming very comfortable with the idea of paintings looking like paint. This is going to be a very modern thing, but it starts during this time. And we're already in the 1780s. Impressionism is going to be in the mid 1800s. So we're getting there. All of these artists are sort of working up towards this new style, including Turner, who's painting the slave ship, and you don't have to remember the whole title, where slaves are being thrown overboard um, for insurance money, because if the boat capsizes or if there's any disease that runs rampant, they won't get their money. But if they go overboard, they will get their money for insurance. So um, uh, you can barely see like all these figures here. There's like legs sticking up and whatnot. He's making a statement against the slave industry. Well, the slave trade had sort of ended in England, but it continued in other places, including this country, a lot longer. So he's making this painting, as a political statement against these atrocities. But the other way we look at this is, his painting style. We can see over here, it's just a whole bunch of globs of paint blended right on the canvas, alla prima. This is, in my mind, the forerunner to Impressionism. And here it is up close, and you can see some of those legs sticking up. In the United States, artists have a lot of land to look at, and this westward expansion is happening in this country, in the area of New York, New England, are a group of artists called the Hudson River School, and they do all of these landscape paintings that really are about the land. There's not even, there's a tiny, I have it here. You can see the artist in his top hat here. He's right here in the painting. They're very subversive. They're sort of hidden in the painting so that this all looks like just about the land. There's no nostalgia here. It's the storm coming in. It's what Cole called a blasted tree. Like time has gone by and here's more nature continuing. This is the Oxbow, which is just a place in the Connecticut River in Massachusetts. And fun fact about me, I grew up about 5 minutes from here. So this is American landscape painting, but in the tradition of Romanticism. Cole had come to Europe and seen, or gone to Europe and seen, many things going on there. And he thought that this was, a great way to show his country. And you can see in this as well, this, agricultural, these are all crops that are growing. So people farming the land. Soon to be developed. As a matter of fact, where this tree is now is a highway. You can see the this part of the Connecticut River from a bridge. Church is another landscape artist. He traveled all over America. He actually went out west and painted all places that most Americans hadn't even seen at this time, like the Grand Canyon, Wyoming. He went down to South America and painted the Andes. He made these big sweeping landscapes that are just, they're just stunning to look at. And it's a romantic view of the landscape. Again, all of this natural stuff is happening at the time of the Industrial Revolution. So, think about the Industrial Revolution as embracing science, like Voltaire, and Romanticism embracing nature, like Rousseau. All right, French Realism, back to France. We start with Courbet, who uh, rejects these academic conventions in lieu of realism, and realism is a strange name for this. It's not realistic like naturalism, like making something look photographic or very real. The real comes in with the subjects. It's real subjects rather than the false things that are happening in the academy and the salon. You don't need to know all this, but Karl Marx is writing at this time his manifesto, um, and he is, calling for people classes to rise up. That the bourgeoisie should not, be running everything. The system that is in place is against most humans. It's the few that, get everything. So he is, workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. He's in line with, Rousseau in a way. And Courbet is, he follows this, as do a lot of people. And he has made this painting that is gigantic. It's almost 5.5 feet by almost 9 feet, which is, would be a history painting in his time, which would be at the salon, hung way up high. It's the most important thing you can do. But here he shows, people in almost rags. This boy's shirt is torn. He's carrying a basket of rocks that is probably way too heavy for him. We have this older man still at it, still working, and their job is to break up stones. They're stone workers. They're poor people. They're, the lower working class doing manual labor. And Courbet is saying these real people doing real things are worthy of art just as much as, say, a Venus figure. And of course, he's doing it with, these big muscular figures like Michelangelo. So, sort of raising up the status of the lower class. This is, showing class struggle like a Marxist. One of his more scandalous paintings is this gigantic painting he did. And he made giant paintings to make them seem as if they were history paintings. And I'm just showing this because you can see how big it is in the museum. Um, uh, so that he's, really wants to raise them all the way up to the status of history paintings. This is called the Burial at Ornans. And you can see all these just normal folks, lower classes, all gathered, and you see the hole here, and there's no body around. He's probably already put in the hole. It's not some romantic view of death like Marat we saw with David, or the death of West or the death of General Wolfe we saw with West last chapter. This is a nobody in a way. This is just a lower class person, and this is everybody's just sort of lined up. There just doesn't seem to be a moment going on here, as if you've just sort of arrived late, and it's just in the process. So, of course, Courbet was highly criticized for this because one critic wrote, "This is, uh, a painting about the death of nobody. Um, what is going on in this? Why are, what is the point of this painting? Is it just to show death?" And Courbet says that this painting shows the death of romanticism. So it does cause a big scandal, and by scandal I mean there's it's not like a revolution in the street. It gets terrible reviews, which incites people to either go and see it more. And a scandal isn't bad if you're trying to make a statement about class struggle. You might just want to shake up the upper classes. So this is a big history painting about ordinary people, just like the Stonebreakers. And Courbet also said, "Is this the burial of the hierarchy of art? This hierarchy of art? Like history painting is number one. Can we change that?" And it's against the salon system, which is the art of the wealthy. Another artist, we're not going to really cover him, is Daumier, who did cartoons. This is a third class card. So other artists are taking up this call, including Millet, who is another French painter. He started a school of realists, and he started a school away from the academy, so away from the teachings of, the official taste of the rich. MLA did giant paintings of regular people doing regular things, doing their job. This is the gleaners, so this is working women. Gleaning is like the leftovers after they have taken all the hay out of the fields that they're going to use. The poor can go in and go ahead and glean what's left for their own use. And so this is much like Courbet's The Stonebreakers, these big female figures in line with, say, Michelangelo, just doing like a most menial thing that poor people will do on the land. And this is The Sower. That's not in your book, just to show you that. Rosa Bonheur is a very funny artist. To me, her style looks a lot like romanticism in a way. This is just the horse fair. There's people going to a fair to sell their horses. Um, she lived out in the country and painted out in the country. And we're not going to really cover that one. And she painted a lot of these. Her funny story is she was arrested for wearing pants because it was illegal for women to wear pants. And she said, I go out and I paint the land. Like she had, would sketch outside, and so I'm not going to wear a dress. So she had to get a special permit to wear pants. And the permit stated officially that she could not wear them in a town or a city. They were only for painting outdoors, out in the country. So that's her story. Manet is a very famous realist painter. So we have the ones we're going to look at are Manet, Millet, and Courbet. Oops, let me go back to this. You don't need to know. We didn't cover Thomas Couture. So he will eventually become an impressionist. He'll be in our next chapter again. But this is a good image here of his. He used to go to the museums. Remember in the last chapter I said museums are being um, started. he would go to, places, and he would study the masters, like this guy here. This isn't him, obviously. And we have his painting here of a Velázquez. He really liked the Spanish painters, the Baroque Spanish, and we could see that in his art, I hope. So if you're an art student, and some of you are that I know of, I feel like this is the best way to learn how to paint is to go and do something like that. Manet starts, he complains, well, not just him, a whole bunch of artists are complaining to Napoleon III about they can't get into the salon. There's not enough people that are let in. There's, hundreds and hundreds of entries that are rejected. And Napoleon, probably getting a little nervous. He doesn't want to make a whole bunch of people angry because he knows that people are prone to revolutions in his country. He authorizes a salon for the rejects, and that is going to be called the Salon des Refusés. So all the people who are rejected from the official salon can now be in this, and they actually call it the Salon of Rejects. And you can imagine most people, viewers, would be so interested to see this. So lots of people do attend this, but they are horrified. It's not the official taste. Most people are put into the Salon de Refusé because they are not painting anything like what people are used to seeing. And of course, if you go to see a show full of that stuff, you will not probably like it. So Manet is a guy who, not only does he help start the Salon de Refusé, but he also embraces this idea, or takes it as an opportunity to push his agenda of trying to get rid of this academic salon system. And so what he does is he makes like visual quotations about um, other art historical subjects or paintings, and brings them into a modern age so that they take on a new meaning. So this is his Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe, or Luncheon in the Grass. And you can see we have, contemporary Parisian men in their Parisian dress, and they are at a Parisian park in a modern time. But this woman does not have her clothes on. For some reason, her clothes are over here in a pile. And this doesn't make any sense. And Manet's point is, why does it make sense in a Renaissance painting? Why does it make sense in an academic painting to have a female nude just there for the male gaze? So he's very much calling into question this idea of the typical subject of the salon that's acceptable. He's turning it around so that it's no longer acceptable. It's not acceptable if it is a modern Parisian woman in a modern Parisian place with clothed men. And this is actually a quotation of a Renaissance painting. So you don't need to know this. This is just sort of the antithesis of what Manet is doing. This is, down the street at the actual salon. This is a very highly it's regarded very high at the salon as like a beautiful, wonderful painting, The Birth of Venus. She has this passive, pose. She's like playing coy. This is for the male gaze. This is totally acceptable for the salon. And Manet is saying, why is that okay? A nude woman is a nude woman. Um, and he's actually quoting the Raphael here, the River Gods, but he's also quoting Titian's Pastoral Symphony as well. And here we have his style. He also has, if you can see, almost outlines on his figures, right? This is not like Ang with his, very like color or line against line. He kind of leaves a very dark shadow around things, so everything looks a little bit maybe outlined, or the value's a little too dark. He's trying to be like a Spanish Baroque painter, really. But in this time in Paris, that wasn't very well liked. He's also doing this thing with his brush and color, where he's not over blending. And this is very modern, this use of paint. And we just saw this with Turner, but Manet is doing this in a salon. This is another one of his paintings, Olympia. And if you get a chance to watch the Khan Academy video, which I show in class about this, they do a good job with this. So this is of huge painting as well. So it's as if it's a history painting. So here again, we have the female nude. We have her engaging us, right? She's staring right at us. She's sort of challenging us to look at her. And this was a total scandal because she is a known prostitute in Paris. So instead of being a Venus figure, she is indeed there for the male gaze and male pleasure. Literally, in real life, she is. And we see her servant bringing her these flowers. Um, and this painting is, is loaded with things like this. This woman who's bringing her flowers, of course, is black. This is at the same time as, whoops, let me go back. This is at the same time as, whoops, go the Civil War, 1863, and getting rid of slavery in this country. So Manet is sort of making a comment on this place of African Americans, or I'm sorry, Black people in Europe. The cat here is a quotation. The whole thing is sort of a quotation on the Titian that we looked at, right? Where the dog was equal to loyalty. And here we have a servant as well. So he's making a direct quotation for this painting. Um, this one is for the male gaze. Remember, this one was for her husband. And this curtain, would have been drawn. And here we have a curtain here as well. So he knew this painting. Obviously, Manet is using art history to make his point. The ridiculousness of, in these modern times when everything in Paris and the world has changed so much, why are we holding on to these tropes of, 1500s? We've already had the Industrial Revolution, moving towards all different dynamic things. Art has to change like the world has changed. And of course, the critics loved making fun of this. Lots of critics talked about how incredibly dirty the figure looked. Her fingers look dirty, her feet look dirty. That's because he's leaving kind of outlines. And there's many jokes about the paintings. This painting, this isn't in your book, but this shows like all of these artists, the realists and impressionists, they all hung out together. It's cafe society in Paris. They get together in each other's studios. The style spread. They make their own sort of unofficial schools of things. And they're debating all kinds of things. So this is Manet here, and he is painting an art critic, art dealer's portrait. And this guy will come back in the next chapter because he will help them, the Impressionists, hold a different salon altogether at his gallery. All right, on to American Realism. Winslow Homer is a very famous American artist. He lived up in New England. He lived in Maine for a lot of his life, but he was a journalist in the Civil War, and he would go out and make all kinds of sketches of the Civil War that would be published in newspapers. Because photography wasn't really around too much, it was being, you know, invented and spread around Europe, and it will eventually come to this country by the end of this chapter anyway. But in the meantime, he would go out and make his drawings. And then this is one of his paintings, Veteran in a New Field. And you can see it's very almost romanticism in a way, but again, we could think of this as, the Gleaners or the Stonebreakers. And he was very successful. He painted lots of things to do with the war. This is one of his Civil War things from a newspaper. He painted like women going to factories. Women in this country the poor started to work in the factories in the Industrial Revolution. And he did this sort of, very innocent kind of landscape things with children. And he also dipped his toe into, romanticism with the landscape. So he's a very interesting artist if you want to look at an American artist. Thomas Eakins is probably the most famous American artist during this time. Andy Warhol probably will take over soon. Um, this was made for the Centennial in Philadelphia, which is where Akins is from and where he painted. He went to school at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, PAFA, which is still an American art school, the oldest one in the country. It's a great school if anybody is looking for an art school to go to. This is celebrating the scientific achievements at the time, which was ether and modern operations. And this is in a school where the students come and study while the doctor professor does his operations. You can see he's pausing to like make his point, and the blood on the fingers there with the scalpel was like very shocking to people. It was judged to be too bloody for viewers, so instead of being displayed at the exhibit at the centennial celebration, this is actually displayed in the Jefferson Medical Hospital, which is right down the street from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and that is still there. The painting, though, was actually moved in 2006. Now it's in the Pennsylvania. Now it's in the Pennsylvania Museum of Art. But it really was displayed in the hospital for just a long time. One of the more famous American paintings. So here we have the doctor, and you can see Akins had gone to uh, France and saw what was going on with the modern art world, but he also traveled all over Spain and Italy, and you can see this Baroque influence in his art with this lighting here. And he went up north as well and saw some Rembrandt. We're going to look at that in a second. Um, and here he is in the painting doing a sketch of the operation itself. And this is Rembrandt's Dr. Tulp that we looked at. And, you can see he's kind of making a visual quotation. So Dr. Gross here, not the word gross because it is gross. Oh, I love this part too. His mother. This is a boy being operated on, and this is most likely his mother, sort of like recoiling in horror at what's going on. And there's a portrait of Thomas Akins there. And he did lots of different paintings. This is just the Schuylkill River in Pennsylvania. He painted all different famous people. This is Walt Whitman, the poet. He was very good at portraiture. And this is his later painting, the Agnew Clinic. These are in your books, but just to sort of round out with this is sort of the counterpart to the other one. Medical procedures change in the United States. Notice they're not in suits. Everybody's more in their sterile whites. And there's nurses, which was a new occupation mostly for women. Really, there weren't male nurses for a long time. So we can see this. And then this guy's giving this person anesthesia, which was just being experimented with. So still sort of the same Baroque style, but he's showing like these scientific discoveries. John Singer Sargent is another American realist. He was extremely good at portrait painting. He was an expat, which means he gave up his, well, I don't know about citizenship, but that just means you live in another country, expatriate. He was active in London and Paris, mostly London. And he is known for these very sumptuous portraits that he did, but with also loose brushstrokes. He sort of has a very enigmatic or mysterious kind of style. You can see here the face and the eyes look, pretty realistic, but then if you look at the ear or this, it's like all of his brushwork, it's all just sort of falling apart. He had gone and studied Frans Hals, and I talked about his brushwork, and Velasquez, I talked about his brushwork. So here we are, an American studying these and, sort of using what he can learn. And this is what I mean by his style. I mean, you can see her. This is the daughters of Edward Boit here, of a wealthy person. And you can see all this stuff that they're importing into their house, the carpets, these gigantic vases that this girl just sort of leans on. These are his daughters. You can see how realistic the faces are, but then, you really look at some things and the paint is just sort of right there on the surface. And he's just incredibly good at these. This is his This isn't in your book. I don't know why. This is one of his more famous ones. Whoops. Um, called Madam X. They changed the name of it because um, when this was displayed at first or exhibited, her shoulder strap had been down. The one on the left here had been on her shoulder, and this is a wealthy woman whose portrait was made, and that was just scandalous. Not only did she have a plunging neckline, but then it just seemed to be too sexual if this had fallen off. Um, so he changed the name to be like an anonymous woman, and he painted the strap back on, and that seemed to soothe people, and he continued on his career to make some of the most incredible portraits. I mean, if you look at this, like it's almost an abstract painting or up here, but then this almost photographic face. This is just, I mean, same thing here. Look at this dress just sort of like breaking up into brush strokes, and yet the crispness of the faces. And he's a good character to look up if you like his style. He had an interesting life. He was quite a dandy. He hung out with all these very, very wealthy people. So he's embracing, the style of realism, but he's not showing the working class people. He's showing, wealthy people living their wonderful lives. He was so successful during his time that the London National Gallery actually bought one of his paintings during his lifetime, which was sort of unheard of. And they had actually at the same time acquired a Velasquez. And so lots of critics sort of said like, oh, he's like on par with him. And so here they both are, Sargent and his dandy outfit, and Velasquez, and they are, taking their own paintings to the museum. So he's going down in history. All right, we're getting there. So there's new materials that are being, iron is being forged, and eventually steel will be made. So architects are starting to use this because, of course, it's very strong material, which has a lot more possibility. It's cheaper, it's faster than stone. Obviously, marble hasn't been used in a while anywhere. And this other interest in other things happening, say this exoticism, is can translate to architecture pretty well. So this is the Royal Pavilion. This is a seaside place, and it's just such an interesting building to happen in England. Um, because of British expansion, in India, they are very, intrigued by all of this stuff happening. So being inspired by the squinch, if you took 114, you know what that is. Um, and of course, iron and steel eventually will be used in this country over and over again, still now. Um, but at first, artists aren't sure what to do with this material. Let it, like, you can use it for post and lintel is the way to use it, but without all the decoration or bells and whistles of what artists are used to or architects are used to, they didn't really know what to do with the material. And so one thing that happens is there's this sort of Romanesque revival that happens, and you can see or Gothic revival. You can see the pointed arch here. This is the Brooklyn Bridge that spans, this sort of wonder at the time, the scientific wonder, and it looks sort of modern from far away. But then you look at here, and it's like a Gothic cathedral, and this Gothic style, we'll look at again when we get to American Gothic, the painting that's sort of very popular in the United States for a while. But some artists are sort of experimenting, like, okay, I need two vaults. This is the library. So I'm going to sort of do barrel vaults like in, Roman architecture, or Roman and Romanesque, but he's, accentuating the skeletal frame of the iron. So this is sort of an example of both. The outside looks like a Renaissance building, right? Like, or, it's rational, it's symmetrical, and we see the arches and the punctuations below. It looks almost like an Italian um, Renaissance building. But the inside, you can see he leaves the skeleton showing. He's showing this new material. So he's kind of combining different things. But not everybody. John Paxton creates the Crystal Palace, which is a prefab iron construction. It has an iron and glass roof. And prefab means that it's made in factories and then assembled at the site so that it takes very short amount of time to be built. Only 6 months to build this whole thing. Now think of, cathedrals would take hundreds and hundreds of years sometimes. So, how great is this new material? Of course, this is not a permanent place. So it didn't have it's not a domestic place. So at least it's like, that was one reason why it took so little time. So this was for a great exhibition. We're going to see this is a time for like world fairs where all people bring all their inventions and things, embracing the new science of the times. And this, is truly embracing this material of just draping the skeleton frame in glass so that everything is totally visible. All right, speaking of new materials, and then this, I believe we're at the end of the chapter, photography is being invented. I didn't talk about this in the chapter of Vermeer, but lots of artists, it's rumored that Vermeer was one of them, and there's plenty of books written for and against this. Did Vermeer cheat and use a camera obscura, which is, actually projecting your image, and it would be upside down, onto a surface so that you could trace it? Is that why he is such an incredible draftsman? When we covered him, I talked about he didn't have a teacher and he didn't have any students. Like, how was he doing all this without all this training? And one theory is he used what was called then a camera obscura. And some other artists did and were very open about it, but Vermeer never, there's no knowledge one way or another. It's pretty interesting to read about. You can look that up if you want. So the first actual camera is the daguerreotype. Rather than this is just using a manipulation of light and mirrors to project an image. There's nothing that's imprinted. The daguerreotype is the prototype to actual camera. The daguerreotype uses a light sensitive surface, a piece of paper or a plate in this case, that you would have to project an image onto for a period of time, and it would burn it into it, and then you take and that would be a permanent image, rather than just like if you move the box in the camera obscura, it's gone. So this would, burn it into the image. But it's a one of. So it's not, as if this is printmaking yet. You can only get one burned in. And at first it would take about, I don't know, more than half a day, say like 8 hours to make an image, burn in an image. And this daguerreotype shows one of the first images of a person photographed, and that is the image of this person here, who is the shoe shine stand guy. And the reason why he's in it is because he's at work in the same place all day. Nobody else is in it. There would have been, horses and carts and stuff in the streets. There would have been people walking in the boulevard. Everybody else goes away. They're not burned into the image because they move too much. He's in the same place all day, so he is the person. So this is the first person ever photographed, a shoe shine guy. Good for him. That's realism. So we see this a scene in Paris where Daguerre is, and there's his self-portrait, which is of course a daguerreotype. Well, soon he gets better and better at this. He finds a way to make the film or the plate, more sensitive, so it takes less and less time. Eventually, he gets down to about 20 minutes, which isn't so bad if you're going to have your portrait taken. But artists don't know what to do with this material at first. They don't know what it is. Daguerre considers himself to be not just a scientist, but an artist. I mean, it's a two-dimensional thing being made of images and pictures of things. So he's thinking it's art. So what he does at first is he's trying to imitate what do artists make. So he makes a still life. Of course, the advantage of a still life is it doesn't move. So it can sit there for half an hour without, ruining the image. There's no like, horse running through, there's no, movement of the head. It's a still life. So it's convenient, but it is, and you see he has the classical things here. He has the cherubs, he has the relief sculpture of the Venus. He's in a painting in the background like, Manet would do for his studio. He's doing what artists do, like what painters would do with photography. And of course, daguerreotypes can be used to document history. So this is done 30 years before the Gross Clinic. He is showing this new material of under ether. Um, so artists and other people, other fields of study, medicine, see this invention as something incredibly useful to document scientific things, historical things, and what to do with it. Now, Talbot, he's not, I don't think he is in your book, and we don't really have to study him. He comes up with a calotype, um, which is a different way of printing. It's not just one thing burned in, it is you um, burn it onto a surface like a film, and that is a negative. And then you have to expose it again onto a paper, a light sensitive paper, and then it is the positive. So it's a printing process, and you can take the first original negative and you can these are still on plate, so it's not like film, like if you've done, darkroom photography. Um, but you can produce more than one. You can use it over and over again. So this is sort of the next step in photography. And he also thinks, well, I'm going to use it like art as well. So, photographers are kind of coping with what to do with the medium. I just found this photograph. This is how they would get somebody to sit still during their portrait for 20 minutes. They would like sort of clamp their heads in there. So this is Abraham Lincoln was president when all this was invented, and he loved to get his photograph. He has many, many photographs of him and his son, him and his family, his wife, everybody. And this changes politics in a way. Number one, you can't have an idealized portrait of yourself. We just talked about Napoleon. You can't suddenly have yourself painted as, a heroic general that's very tall if you are, if you weren't really there and you weren't really tall, right? You can still have a painting done, and of course, presidents do have paintings done. Their official portrait of a president is still a painting, not a photograph. I find that very interesting. To be hung in the White House, it has to be a painting. So maybe we have our own, salon system. And this is the one from your book. Of course, it can be used for photojournalism. And we can't underestimate how important, not just to art history, to history itself, to the world. What does the photograph mean? Politicians can't lie very easily about their image anymore. Of course, they can, they will, they do. But, it can record everything. Jericho doesn't need to build a raft. Well, maybe because there's no camera on the raft, but you know what I mean. We see, you can watch the news now. You can, pick up a newspaper or look in any website. Those are all pictures that people have taken of things going around in the world today. It makes the world a much, much smaller place. Nadar is the next artist that we'll look at, and he loved to take portraits. This is a portrait of Delacroix. This is a portrait of Courbet, the Stonebreakers we just looked at. Courbet was a very, very big man. This is a portrait of Manet, Olympian Déjeuner Célèbre, and this is Monet. He will be in our next chapter. So all of these artists know about photography. Obviously, they go and have their photographs taken by Nadar. Um, and they are going to embrace photography. Artists can go one way or another. Lots of artists are going to be threatened by photography. Is it going to take away my job? Does anybody want their portrait taken? Or they're going to use it. Obviously, it's pretty convenient to take a portrait of somebody and work from a painting. Most artists do. And so we're going to look back at, the influence of photography on painting in the next chapter. But Nadar liked to also, ballooning was his hobby, and he would take his camera up and he would take aerial photographs. This is the first aerial photographs. And this is just a drawing somebody did in a newspaper um, of his. All right, until the next chapter when we get into Impressionism. Sorry, this was long. It's a very long chapter. Okay, thanks.